Good evening all, and welcome. Today's video has been graciously sponsored by The Rich Wallet. They were very kind to send me one of these beauties, and even though it's not a word I typically use to define a wallet, its elegance and simplicity really speaks for itself. For too long have I been hefting around my thick leather wallet, and now that I have the Rich Wallet, it's changed the feel of my pocket completely. I guess I never really noticed how bulky and in the way it was until now. It's great, all you do is just slot your cards in and put your cash in your money strap. It's literally changed my life. And that's it, you're all set. There's no need for anything else. It's super durable and comes with a lifetime guarantee. So, if you're interested in getting one of your very own, or for someone else, be sure to punch in the promo code Mortis for 10% off. The link can be found in the description. So go on, liberate your pockets today. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. I'm 20 years old and a front desk agent at a mid-range hotel in a small East Coast city. I'm a full-time student at the university and live alone in a one-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood made up mostly of college students. At the hotel, I've had to deal with a fair amount of unpleasant or creepy people. Since a young woman in a customer service job seems like an easy target, I was used to old ladies yelling at me or inappropriately aged men making remarks on my appearance, like, "You just have the most adorable smile. I bet you're a heartbreaker." And I've usually been able to deflect. When I work on weekdays, I'm always on the 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift, where we handle check-ins. It was a slow night, where we only had 28 check-ins to deal with, and by 8 p.m., my co-worker Mindy and I had done all our tasks, and were leaning over the front desk chatting and watching the news, which blared perpetually from the TV in the lobby's breakfast area. We only had a handful of check-ins left, so we had kicked back with our deck of cards and Chinese takeout all over the desk. A younger man checked in, and I remember thinking he was cutish, but definitely looked Republican. He had neat blonde hair and a boyish smile, a weak chin, and was wearing khakis and a quarter-zip fleece. We had a pretty regular interaction, save for him making a lot of eye contact and smiling. And he went to his room. About half an hour later, he came back down and asked us where he could get alcohol. We told him there was a convenience store across the street that had beer and wine, and he and I joked a little about how it was closing soon, so he'd better run there. When he came back, he slid a 40-ounce across the desk towards me. With my customer service smile of vague cluelessness, I said, "What's this?" "It's for you." He leaned against the desk. Front desk agents have to stand up, so the top tier of the desk was about chest height. And when he leaned over, he was right in my face. "Oh, I can't drink that right now, but thank you. I think you should be the one to enjoy that." He was insistent, and I agreed I would take a drink after work, and I went into the office and put it with Mindy's stuff. She'd appreciate the free alcohol, but I didn't feel good about drinking a 40 from some too friendly guy. He hung around the desk for a while, and Mindy is the type of person who can keep someone talking for hours, even if they don't want to, because her brain never runs out of content, and she treats everyone like she's known them for years. This meant that this guy, Mr. Hanson, wasn't leaving anytime soon. They were talking about politics, and I heard him throw around some vaguely conversive rhetoric, but I pretended to be engrossed in my homework. He kept glancing over at me and trying to smile, but it was getting late, my feet hurt, and all I wanted to do was to go home in my underwear, roll a spliff with my cats, instead of allowing some 35-year-old he could flirt with me. At one point, Mindy had to make a phone call, so he slid down the desk towards me. I put on my customer service smile. So, go to a liberal arts college? My uniform shirt was short-sleeved, so you could see a few tattoos on my arm, and I have a nose piercing, so I assumed that the music theory homework I was doing on him informed his guess. Oh no, I go to the local university. The city's main attraction besides its hippies and breweries was my college, and a pretty good state school, so it was surprising he didn't assume I went there instead. He was sizing me up, and I prayed that Mindy would be done with her phone call soon, but it was her long-distance boyfriend, and she wandered into the back office to talk to him. He started talking about his experience in his southern university, and how he was a veteran, but got injured so he lived off pension or something and didn't work, and was just touring New England right now. The conversation somehow turned to his love life, but I'm pretty sure I was so spaced out by that point, thinking about how I was going to eat at least an entire frozen pizza when I get home, that I didn't pay attention to what he was saying, until it was clear he had asked me a question. "Would you do that?" he asked. "Would I do what? Get freaked out because I don't work? A lot of the chicks I date think that's weird." I remember exactly what he said, because I thought it was weird he called girls chicks, and how he spat it out. I laughed nervously and said, "I don't know, I don't think so." The hotel was on the smaller side, and I was very aware of the fact that Mindy and I were the only employees in the building at that time. He began to ask me probing questions about my love life, along the lines of, "Are you single? No. Would you like him if he moved away? Do you think you'll be with him a long time?" The last question freaked me out, and I wished I'd asked him to stop asking me personal questions like that. But I'm polite to a fault even when I'm not working, so I kept smiling and laughing and giving him friendly but impersonal answers. "You're very warm," he told me. "Have you ever worked with kids?" He talked a lot about how the girls he dated back wherever he was from, Ohio maybe, are shallow and materialistic, and how I seemed like a down-to-earth kind of girl. I was such a cutie, and did I know about the girl next door trope? "I'm like the girl next door, but cool," he told me. I imagine he was referring to my tattoos again, and at this point I was physically queasy and uncomfortable but couldn't disengage. Guest reviews are hugely important in the hospitality business, so at this hotel, we're strictly trained to let guests treat you however they want. You just can't upset them. It probably would have been reasonable at this point to ask him to leave the front desk, but I felt so hopeless, and being assertive with people at work is so against my instinct that it didn't even cross my mind to say anything. Because of this, I had to stay there listening to this guy and politely accepting compliments. I assumed he typically got away with it, since he was attractive and clean-cut with a slight baby face. I kept praying for the phone to ring and for someone to ask me to perform some sort of complicated and long task, so I could get away. But the only time it did was when a neighboring hotel called to ask if we had printer ink. Mindy was on the phone in the back until eventually Sam, our night auditor, arrived. And I realized that this guy had monopolized the entire last 2 hours of my shift, trying to get me to sleep with him and/or admit I secretly supported Trump. Hoping Mr. Hanson would take this as his cue to leave, I went into the office and got my coat and backpack. When I came back out to witness Sam count the drawer, Mr. Hanson was still standing there. "Well, I hope you have a good night," I said to him. "Are you walking out this way?" He gestured down the hall which led to all the rooms, as well as the door to the back parking lot. I told him I parked out front, which thankfully was true, and was able to get into my car successfully. I sat there for a while responding to the texts that had piled up on my phone while Mr. Hanson was diverting my attention. It was about a 10-minute drive from the hotel to my apartment downtown, and I noticed that a car was pulling out of the parking lot at the same time I was. It wasn't Mindy's car. She always stayed an extra half hour or so after her shift technically ended, but there was another hotel next door, so I assumed it was an employee or guest there. I wasn't too concerned when the Nissan was right behind me, but I noticed it had Florida plates, which a lot of rental cars around here do. I take a weird way to get across town, which involves cutting through the University Hospital's enormous and needlessly complicated parking lot, which spans about 3 blocks. It wasn't necessarily a quicker route, but I liked how there were never any cars there this time of night, and I could go as fast as I wanted in a Subaru Outback. The parking lot, as I said, is needlessly complex, which means stoplights which all turn into blinking yellows after 9 p.m, medians and grassy areas placed seemingly at random, and a lot of twists and turns which all go to specific buildings and exits. I'm explaining this parking lot in so much detail to express how strange it was that this rental car was following me this pretty nonsensical route. It was not a way that any kind of map app would take you, since there are more straightforward streets surrounding the parking lot. I initially assumed it was someone going to the hospital, since it was the only major medical facility in a 100-mile radius, and the only well-funded one in a larger area. A lot of the people and their families who stayed at the hotel were going there for the hospital, so the momentary explanation I gave myself seemed feasible. It was maintaining a polite distance, but was one of those cars with the ultra-bright LED headlamps which were blinding my mirrors, so the car was impossible to ignore. It followed me around each point, and at one point, just to see, I went in a big circle around the south half of the lot. Sure enough, the car made the exact same circle. My explanation, which was already crumbling, dissolved completely when I drove past the entrance to both the main hospital and the emergency room. Steady consumption of crime shows, scary movies, and true crime Reddit pages and podcasts have made me a very paranoid person. So at that point I picked up that something was probably wrong. I figured I should avoid going back to my real apartment, especially since it was just begging to be broken into with a lot of windows and a very old front door that opens directly to the outside. Obviously at this point, I was relatively certain it was Mr. Hanson. Like I said, I had had guests cross the line before, making me come out from behind the desk to hug them, touching me when I'm straightening up the lobby, asking the front desk to bring up a towel, and answering the door in various states of undress, but I had never been followed or particularly fixated on. A hotel receptionist, even if they're good looking, is someone you have a few brief and pleasant interactions with, but you don't really think about them when they're not there. I decided my best bet would be to get back to the hotel. I looped back through town, the Nissan following at a polite distance, and I'll reiterate how he was trying to be discreet as he could, keeping as far behind as possible while still maintaining me within sight. He wasn't trying to intimidate me so much, maybe monitor me. Whatever his reasons, I was still afraid. I abandoned the use of turn signals and sped back to the hotel, calling the hotel along the way and asking Sam if he and possibly the security guard we contracted to patrol the property after 11 p.m. could meet me at the front door. When I arrive back at the hotel, I pull around to the front where Sam and the security guard were standing under the awning, while the Nissan hit the gas to the back lot. I explained the situation and the security guard went out the back door to look for the car and its driver. When he returned, he said he spoke to a peppy blonde guy outside who was coming in. He said he had just been out to smoke a cigarette and was now returning to his room. Security asked him if he had seen a Nissan with Florida plates, and he said he hasn't. There wasn't much more we could do at that point. Luckily, I wouldn't be working for a few days after Mr. Hanson was set to check out, and we were fully sold out that weekend, so he couldn't extend his stay if he wanted to. All guests were asked upon check-in to write down make, model, colour and plate of their vehicle on registration card, so just to confirm I pulled his reg card. Sure enough, the silver Nissan Altima with Florida plates. Here's what he wrote on his TripAdvisor review. Great stay, room was clean, breakfast was hot, and that's all I can ask for, lol. The best thing about this hotel were the staff though. I had a lovely time with the two ladies at the front desk. Natasha especially, a very sweet young girl. Hope to be seeing you sooner rather than later. Mr. Hanson, we won't meet again because my manager put you on the banned list. This happened primarily to my mum. I'm a 19-year-old female who was studying in a university in England, entering my second year last month. We decided to stay in my university town the day before I was due to move into my student home, so I could get there early and move my stuff in, and give me the rest of the day to relax before we started Freshers Week. The night before moving day, me and my mother stayed in a local hotel in my university town, and were greeted by a friendly guy called Jeremy. Jeremy was very attentive and showed us to our rooms and stayed around 10 minutes telling us the history of the hotel and repeatedly asked us if we needed help unpacking and stuff, which we kindly rejected. It was a Friday, so me and my mother went around the town and had a few drinks. Nothing too heavy as Freshers Week started the next day, so I wanted to be fresh for Saturday night. Before going out, Jeremy explained that he never works weekends, so told us to have a good night and wished me luck with the rest of my university journey. He gave me and my mother a hug each and a slight kiss before moving his hand down towards her bum, which she found weird but brushed it off as nothing. My mum is 37 but looks young for her age, and Jeremy is easily in his 40s, so we just thought Jeremy may have fancied her chances with her. Moving on. Me and my mum have a great night around the town, and watch a few live bands and have a few wines, so we're a bit on the tipsy side. We get back to the hotel, and the bar is still open, so we decided to have a nightcap. While we're having a drink in the bar, Jeremy emerges from a back room and spots us and makes a couple of jokes. He then proceeds to watch a video on his phone at full volume of a woman screaming at the top of her lungs as if her life was being ended. This screaming was blood-curdling and made me and my mum unsettled, and also another couple in the bar looked a little concerned as well. The video lasted 3 to 4 minutes before Jeremy laughed and went into the back. When we start making our way, my mum had taken her shoes off after they had become painful from all the dancing in the bars earlier. Jeremy emerges from the back room and puts his arms around my mum and says, "Oh, let me help you to your room, honey. You must be wasted after all that drinking." My mum isn't actually drunk and insists that she's fine, but Jeremy persists and basically follows us to our room and proceeds to come in. But I bid him good night and close the door in his face before locking it. Next morning, we are up early and make our way down for breakfast. The young girl working takes our breakfast orders, only for Jeremy to bring them out, insisting the eggs are cooked to perfection, although he claimed he never worked weekends. Me and my mum are weirded out by Jeremy at this point and checked out of the hotel straight after breakfast. Jeremy sees us and says these exact words, "I'll be seeing you soon, Christy." Anyway, at the time it doesn't strike us as unusual, and my mum drives us to my new home and helps me unpack. Once I'm all ready, she leaves in the early afternoon, as she had to work that evening at our local bar. The rest of the day goes without much going on, but that night I'm out drinking with my housemates and I get a call from my mum saying Jeremy had just come to the bar where she works. This is no coincidence, as when we're having our nightcap, Jeremy would have heard us talking about the bar where my mum works, and he also had our address, which needed to be provided at the hotel for whatever reason. He also said to my mum, when she was pouring his pint, that she should go round to his friend's house after her shift, which was just around the corner. This call really scared the crap out of me. A half hour later, Mum called me and said that Jeremy had left the bar after she rejected his offer to go to his friend's house later, but Jeremy had said he'd be back for her. This was really worrying, and I told her to make sure that a customer was always with her when she was locking up on her own that evening. After this call, I felt sick and didn't join my friends in going to the nightclubs. In the meantime, I called my dad, who no longer speaks to my mum. They're not on bad terms, they just chose not to keep in touch with each other after they split a few years ago. My dad is a club bouncer, but he wasn't on duty that night, and I called him and begged him to drive down there and make sure everything was okay. My dad clearly knew by my shaky voice that I was panicked, scared and helpless. 1 a.m. rolled around and I didn't get a response from either my mum or my dad's phone. I was worried sick and hoped that Jeremy hadn't been waiting around the corner and done something to my mum while she was locking up. At 1:30, my mum finally ran me in hysterics. As she had been locking up, Jeremy had pulled up in his car with 3 other men and shouted at her to get into the car for a ride. My mum declined his advances, and he got out the car and approached her and told her that he won't tell her again. He said she had been flirting and teasing him ever since she checked in last night. She told Jeremy that was nonsense and she wasn't at all into him. As Jeremy approached her, she could smell heavy liquor. As Jeremy went to grab her, my dad pulls up behind the car and beeps his horn. This caused Jeremy to go back into the car, climb back in, and tell my mum that he knows where she lives, and he'll be waiting. The car screeches off. My dad gets out of his car and tells her that I had told him to check on her. Scared to go home, she asks my dad to drop her off at my grandmother's as she doesn't want to be alone. After that night, we never saw Jeremy again. But my mum did make a report to the police about him and gave them a full account of what happened, but she hasn't heard back from them. I'm just so relieved that my dad turned up to the pub when he did, as it would have been very easy for Jeremy to get my mum into that car, as she's only 5'2" and weighs roughly 120 pounds. I just hope that scumbag got what was coming to him and is behind bars. My mum, as you can imagine, has been pretty affected by this, and is only now comfortable being alone in her own home. So Jeremy, let's not meet again. This happened over 15 years ago, and it is still clear as day to me. It took me around 6 years to share this with anyone, as I was in fear that it would return. I was staying with my parents at a hotel in South Florida with a friend of mine. We had a Pop Warner football jamboree the following day. I wouldn't really call it a hotel, more like a day's inn. I'll try to be as descriptive as possible. You ever get the feeling that something is watching you, or trying to get your attention without making a sound? This feeling was so intense and hit my gut so hard. The feeling mostly made me nervous, and this is what woke me out of a deep sleep at 3 or 4 a.m. I sit up in bed and immediately get that awkward feeling. I look around the room and see my parents sleeping to the bed closest to the entrance of the room. My friend and I are on the bed closest to the window. The only thing bringing a little bit of light into the room is the alarm clock and the crack under the door to the main hall. While I'm looking around the room, I'm drawn to the window next to the bed. It looks open because the curtains are moving, but it's a window that can't be opened. About 15 seconds go by, and I can't stop looking at the window. I become so nervous and worried for some reason. Similar feeling to when you know something bad's gonna happen. Kind of like going on a scary ride for the first time, but 10 times scarier than that. Then out of nowhere, this object appears at the window. Keep in mind, we're on the 4th floor at this point, and it's hard to describe this figure. But the best way I could describe it would be comparing it to something. At the moment, I knew nothing about the Grim Reaper, but if I had to compare it to anything, it would be that. It was a cloud, very realistic in shape, taller than a grown man. It didn't have a scythe, it was just itself. The feeling I got is something I'll never forget, and like I said, words can't describe it. As it came slowly into the room, it made its way to the front of my bed, then stopped. Now facing the door entrance to our room, I could sense it knew I was watching or seeing it. About 6 seconds went by when it slowly turns its covered head towards me. As it was turning towards me, I got out of bed and pulled the blankets off and hid under the bed and waited. Being so young and unaware of the worst case scenario, as being dragged from under the bed and taken away from my parents was probably that, I waited. But nothing happened. I just waited until the sun came up, and my parents asked me what I was doing on the floor. My friends always ask me, why didn't I scream or yell for my parents? I tell them that this thing brought so much fear into me, I couldn't even begin to comprehend what was happening. I was terrified, and didn't say a word of it for 6 years, only when another friend of mine shared a pretty intense story. But nothing has happened since. No ghost or anything like that. I just wanted you to know. And if anyone has a similar experience, I'd love to hear about it. For all of those of you wondering if this is sleep paralysis, I've had it before, and it wasn't that. Not to mention, I couldn't have been found under the bed if I'd have had sleep paralysis. In any case, I'm not exactly the religious type, but I just wish to know what the hell I saw that fateful night long ago. When I was in 7th grade, my parents decided to take a 3-week-long summer trip to Europe. Most of the vacation was amazing. After all, I was a child in a different continent, and some people never get that chance to travel ever. But while I was in France, some things went down that I have thought about for years, and that still give me chills. We were staying at a pretty nice hotel. I don't remember much except sharing a room with my little sister, and my parents sharing the other. But one night my parents went out to eat, and said that I should take my sister to the hotel's indoor kids area for an hour, and then go back to the room. So I did that. While at the play area, I watched my sister. Other people were there, mostly adults, all of whom I assumed were watching their children. But at one point, one of the aforementioned adults started talking to me. A brown-haired man who simply looked like your average Joe, and didn't seem menacing at all. I just thought he was trying to make conversation with the weird girl sitting alone in the kids' play area. So I conversed with him. Basic stuff at first. How I liked traveling and where I came from. Then it got a little more personal. How old I was. Where were my parents? And was another sibling with me? When he asked these questions, he would take his phone out and slightly point at me. But being a dumb middle schooler, I didn't stop talking or leave. We had been talking for nearly 20 minutes, and I noticed it had been around an hour. So I said bye to him and went to grab my sister. I get her out and leave the area. But out of the corner of my eye, I see him pull out his phone and point dead straight at me. Even at 12, I could realize something was out of whack, so I booked it as fast as I could back to the hotel room. When my parents returned, I didn't tell them of the incident because I didn't want to hear a lecture on stranger danger. Besides, I thought I had seen the last of Mr. Creeper, but I was not that lucky. A different time when I took my sister to the play area, I saw the same man. I wasn't too worried as there were other adults around, so it's not like he could take me there and then, but I still wanted to avoid conversation though. He started talking to me, addressing me by name, which somehow made the whole situation even more uncomfortable. I spoke with him though until he asked what my room number was. I said that my parents said I should never tell another person my room number, which was true, but I mainly just didn't want this weirdo to get the number. He said that's a rule that only applied to strangers, and that me and him were not. While he said this, he was touching my shoulder, which made me want to scream. Funny he said that we weren't strangers, because I then realized that I was the one giving all the personal information. I don't even think he told me where he came from. He said his name was Paul, but that name is so generic he could have been lying, which he probably was. Those thoughts triggered me to say that I had to go. I was late to see my parents. I snatched my little sister and ran to the hotel's front desk, scared that if I went to my room the man would follow. I told the people at the desk the description of the man and where he was. They told me to go to my room, and that they would take care of it. I went back to my room where my parents were waiting and told them. We left on a train early the next day, and I wasn't alone again for the rest of that trip. This happened a while ago. I was in a hospital with my parents on the outskirts of a city of a huge campus filled with trees and forest. I had just had minor surgery performed on me. After the surgery, it was almost evening, and we decided to stay there for the night and head back home the next day, as I was still weak from the operation. My dad went to search for a nearby hotel, but most hotels near the hospital and the medical college campus were already full by then. There were a few with very expensive rooms. It wasn't a big city and quite near to a mountain, so our options were limited. My dad told me to eat at the restaurant nearby while he continued to search, and he returned half-hour later saying he'd found a good guest house. We were relieved, and we drove in a cab to get there. It was a bit far into the forest trail, completely surrounded by trees, but then after a while we reached it. It looked serene. We went inside and asked for a room on the ground floor if possible, as I couldn't walk much. However, the guy at the reception said the only room available at the time was on the second floor, so we just had to go there, but I was happy that we at least got a room. It was large and spacious with 2 beds, and all this for even cheaper than the small awful rooms that we had seen earlier. We asked why it's so cheap, and the guy said that the guest house is only for the patients and their families, so cheap. And we were quite happy and settled into the room. Strange goings-on started happening from that moment. It was a winter evening, so quite cold, but something weird was going on with the windows. It was a big room, the windows were besides the bathroom in the corner, and there were no buildings, just trees. Quite a hilly area. My dad got up to freshen up, and I told him to close the window while he was going to the bathroom. Half-hour or so after, I went to the bathroom and found the windows were still opened. I told my dad and asked if he forget if it was so cold, but my dad said he did. I thought he forgot. We didn't think much of it and closed the window. When we went to have dinner, we went downstairs, but there was no one in the dining hall, just the chef. We asked where the rest of the people were, and he said that most of them had already eaten and gone to bed, but it was only 8 p.m. Surprised and a little confused, we ate. The food was surprisingly good, despite the low price we paid, so we were happy. And then things started to get strange. Once we reached our room, my dad realized his phone was missing. We searched everywhere in the room and asked my dad where he had left his phone. He said he'd left it on the bedside table, but it was nowhere to be seen. That's when I noticed the window was open again. I asked my mum and dad if they had opened the window for whatever reason, and they had not. Now I know for sure I had closed the window. It was weird. We thought some thief must have come through the window, but it wasn't possible. The windows were locked from within. We were on the second floor with just trees around us. Nevertheless, we kept searching for the phone. We were sure as hell it wasn't in the dining hall, because my parents are very compulsive about these things and always check before they leave. but nonetheless we still went down. When we arrived, we saw no one was there in the dining hall. We searched high and low, and there was no phone. There was no one on the ground floor either, no one at the reception. We assumed everyone must have gone to sleep, but it was barely 8:30 p.m. We wanted to contact someone in the reception, and when we went there was no one there. But oddly enough, my dad's phone was below the desk of the reception. We assumed my dad had forgot and left it there when we arrived. But when we got back to our room, my earphones were now gone. I knew I had put them on the bed before leaving for dinner, but now they were nowhere to be found. After a lot of searching, we found them under the bed, deep under. It was strange. I was just relieved that I got them. Then we were chilling for a bit. My parents were chatting, me playing some games on my phone, when suddenly we heard a woman screaming. She was crying in our native language to please not hurt her and leave her alone. We thought a couple was having a fight beside us in one of the rooms. It was very unsettling to hear her cries. Then it suddenly stopped. Me and my dad got up to see what the fuss was all about. When we left the room, we saw no one outside. We thought, let's check if everything is alright. The room beside us was locked, so we went to the next room. It was locked too. We went to the next. Every room on our floor was locked. We got curious. Where did the sound come from? We went to the first floor, and the same thing. They were all locked from the outside. And after going down to the bottom floor, all the rooms there were locked as well. All the rooms in the guest house were locked. There was nobody except us. Why did they say all the rooms were booked and gave us that room on the second floor when we asked for a room on the ground floor? Where did the scream come from? Where were all the people? At this point, my dad was starting to get irritated. He wanted to speak to someone, and we went searching, but no one was there in the reception. No one at the adjacent room besides the dining room for staff. We went to the entrance to find someone outside, as the doors were locked from the outside. We were locked in a guest house with no one inside. We kept banging and shouting to open the door, and no one did. My dad just said, at the end, let's go to the room and wait till morning. Something seems very fishy. We went back, and while we were there, my mum was reading some texts from a spiritual book. She always has this book with her, and she was quite scared. She said that after she went away, she heard the voice of a woman again. She was laughing like a maniac now. She was scared and began chanting the mantras, hoping no harm will come. As you can imagine, we didn't get a moment's sleep that night. When we woke up in the morning, we grilled the supervisor, and he didn't offer us much explanation. It all seemed rational to them. Turns out that the guy on duty went to sleep for the night in a nearby apartment. They locked all the doors for safety reasons apparently, because freedom to leave isn't included in the price you pay, apparently, and that if we really wanted to leave we could have just shouted to the guard. That was the person who was outside, but they ignored us when we tried doing that, so there you go. Apparently it's all for security, to prevent break-ins and stuff. In any case, we were just glad to leave that place. It was giving us seriously bad vibes. We hopped in our cab and drove away. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's video. If you did, please don't forget to let me know down below. You know what to do. So, hotel stories. Hotels can certainly be creepy. I've never had a bad hotel experience. I've also never stayed in a creepy hotel before, but I have seen some haunted ones. I think it would be an interesting experience to see what it's like to stay in one. If anyone has ever had anything spooky or creepy happen to them, you know what to do. You can email me your stories or post them on my Reddit. Links are provided in the description. I'd also like to give a huge thank you to my patrons. If you would like to be thanked, get exclusive perks and prizes for, signing up, You can find the link in the description, and it really helps me out. Thanks, guys. But for now, I'm gonna sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.